Good afternoon from just outside the White House. I'm Gary Franchi, your chief White House correspondent for the Next News Network. And what you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's not satire. It's the federal government under Robert F. Kennedy Jr. finally turning its sights on the corrupt practices of big food. Now, for decades, chemical additives, petroleum-based dyes, and contaminants have quietly made their way into our meals, while the watchdogs meant to protect us looked the other way. But now, finally, there's a push from inside the government to expose the truth and clean up the system. Now, let's begin with the clip that kicked this all off. RFK Jr. drops the hammer on the food industry, taking aim at those so-called safe additives they've been sneaking into our meals for decades. Take a look.
The GRAS standards is a standard that was adopted in 1958. It was adopted because when FDA was created to regulate food, there were foods that were generally recognized as safe, GRAS, generally recognized as safe, like flour, like dairy, like eggs. And they didn't want to make companies test those products, so they created that designation. But that designation was expanded by an industry that began taking advantage of it so that any new chemical that they want to add to our food is generally recognized as safe and gets no review. That's why we have 10,000 ingredients in our food in this country. In Europe, they only have 400. And we have the worst chronic disease burden of any country in the world. So we are going to get rid of the GRAS standards for new products. We're going to go back and review all of these old ingredients to make sure that they are safe. And we're going to encourage these companies to get rid of them as quickly as possible.
GRAS, generally recognized as safe, was a regulatory joke. It gave food giants a blank check to pump your groceries full of chemicals as long as they called it safe. Well, Kennedy wants that loophole closed, and that's long overdue. Now, here's more proof that this isn't just talk. RFK Jr.'s HHS has officially launched a review of the food dyes many of us grew up eating. Watch this.
We want to do everything that we can to incentivize these companies to be transparent, to switch over from ultra-processed food, and to be part of this movement to make America healthy again.
Dr. Mark Siegel, Fox News senior medical analyst and professor of medicine at NYU Langone Health. Are Americans addicted to certain foods because of what's in them?
There's no question about that, because ultra-processed foods, Harris, are made to taste a certain way and to stay on the store shelves longer, and they draw you in both by their outrageous color that looks like they're from outer space in terms of children's cereals. And it was interesting that some of the makers of these breakfast cereals were at this meeting. And then once you're drawn in, they've got taste, high fructose corn syrup. You know, it's something you want more and more of, and it's also known as empty calories. And as RFK Jr. said to Hannity, and I know this perked up your ears because we talk about this on the show all the time, it leads to mental health issues because food is medicine, and you're actually giving food as medicine that affects mental health.
That is so critical. You and I have also talked about the weight issues that we have with so many Americans in this country and how that also can deepen the depression. So this is a vicious cycle if what you're eating is also, you're getting addicted to it.
Petroleum-based dyes, yes, the same stuff used to make GRAS are being fed to kids in cereal and candy. This is a public health disaster masquerading as a nutrition label. Kennedy's review could finally rip the mask off. And if you're wondering whether the public is finally getting some tools to protect themselves, well, this next update should give you some hope. Watch this announcement.
All right, we got some good news. Press release just came out. The HHS and the FDA announces a chemical contaminant transparency tool for foods. So essentially what this is that you can now go on a database online on the chemical contaminants transparency tool on the HHS or FDA website, and you can type in any food and you can see what the potential chemical contaminants could be. Now, obviously, this is an exhaustive list, but I think that this is the first step in providing transparency behind what goes into all of our foods. Now, this doesn't include bioengineered foods, which I think is something that needs to be moved on very quickly. I want to know exactly how much bioengineered food and feed there is in the foods that we're eating, right? We need first, second, third generation digestion, if you will. So, for example, what is an animal being fed? This is huge, though. But I think one thing that's important here is that you've got to look at this and understand that you might see some chemicals here. Some of them are naturally occurring in nature. They're going to be in all of our foods. But then look at the baselines, right? So just play around with this tool and look like up and down to see. I'll use mercury for an example. That's the first thing I go to because I think of seafood. And there's obviously mercury in some seafood, much higher levels of mercury in certain high trophic level or migratory fish that are going to eat down on the food chain. And then you've got smaller, virtually untraceable amounts of mercury. And then there's, of course, a government threshold of what's allowed in there. So when you click in mercury, you actually see that there's pretty much an equal amount of mercury in wheat as there is in all the fish that we're worried about consuming. So does that mean we need to get mercury out of wheat, or does it mean that it's just a traceable amount and that we're all kind of consuming the right amount? So I think what needs to stem from this new transparency tool is really explanations and the framework for making decisions as consumers. And then we need to make sure that a lot of the food manufacturers can't hide these chemicals. Now that we know about them, right? This is step one. Everybody's like, what has he done so far? It's only been 30 days. I mean, look at it's all about transparency. That's the first step, especially in a free market. I've said we don't want to ban foods left and right. What we need to do is we need to, of course, immediately ban the chemicals, the foods that we know are making us sick. And when we see science that says, no, these are healthy for you, but then you read the science and you understand that the science was funded by the food manufacturers that are putting those particular food dyes and synthetic ingredients in our foods, we need to start from an assumption that it's innocent, or it's not innocent, it's guilty, and then we need to prove its innocence when it comes to food, right? Because then we consume it for 20 years and we get sick. So that's one thing where just baseline, we got to get rid of the things that we know are making us sick.
Now, for once, Washington is giving Americans information instead of hiding it. Imagine that. A searchable tool to see exactly what toxins are hiding in your food. This is the kind of transparency that we've been demanding for years, but RFK Jr. didn't just review the science, he gave the food industry a warning shot. Now this sums up the no-nonsense tone that his department is taking. Take a look.
We told them that we wanted the dyes out of the food. The science on the dyes is so overwhelming. They're making products now in this country that have the dyes in them, like Fruit Loops, for example, and you buy the same product in Canada and it doesn't have the dyes. You buy the same product in Europe and it doesn't have the dyes. So there are a lot of ingredients, and one of the things that we're doing is we've launched a review of the GRAS standards, and we're going to get rid of the GRAS standards for most products.
Now that's not a suggestion, that's a direct order, and if these companies don't comply, it's clear Kennedy's not afraid to name names and take action. This could finally be the reckoning that the food industry deserves. So what does all of this mean? Well, for the first time in years, two of the most captured agencies in Washington, HHS and USDA, are actually cleaning house. Now it's early and the fight is far from over, but the corrupt alliance between big food and federal regulators is being exposed in real time. And if RFK Jr. keeps pulling these threads, there's no telling what else may unravel. From outside the White House, I'm Gary Franchi. We'll stay on it because somebody has to.